Welcome back, guys. I'm continuing my reading of The Fighter in the Family, chapter 2. So Nathaniel's baby just got here, and we're going to find out what happens. Okay. Chapter 2. It was 1972, and Nathaniel was 30 years old, and he and Hortense had a son at last. The boy was 3 months old and was filling out like a watermelon. The child wasn't fat, but he was solid and sturdy and had big bones like his father and a strong appetite to back it up. Everybody said he would grow tall like Nathaniel. He had been named Nathaniel Hector Jr., but only his father called him Nathaniel all the time. Most people called him Junior, and Hortense called him Juju or just Drew sometimes. Juju had arrived at all the milestones that babies his age were supposed to, and he was cheered on every step of the way by his eager parents, especially Nathaniel, who saw great promise in the boy. At present, Juju had long mastered rolling and smiling and holding his head up while lying flat on his belly. He saw and heard and made noises at everything. And he was now making ready to try his hand at that thing that grown-ups did, which seemed to the child to be very bad for the back, but quite a popular pastime in these parts, which was a thing they call sitting. Juju had never actually tried to sit yet, but it was the next thing he intended to do. He had made a sort of list in his mind based upon things that he saw going on around him. Nathaniel, too, had made a little list in his mind from that same day Juju had been born. First on the list was that Juju would go to basic school, then on to primary school, and after acing his exams and gaining the government scholarship, would go on to high school, where he would study all the subjects but pay keen attention to the agricultural sciences, so that by the time he graduated high school on the honors list, he would be ready to enroll in the School of Agricultural Science and would excel at that and come back to Walkerswood to take his place alongside his father, tending the good earth. Of course, Juju was only the first of their children. Nathaniel wanted umpteen more sons and daughters when the time was right, but for now, Juju was his world and his life. Nathaniel was sitting on the veranda, surveying his lands. Even from across the street, he could see the red pimento berries. The trees were so loaded. At this time, when the crop came in, he hired 2 young men to help him pick the berries and dry them. They would start doing so any day now. Further up pasture, the cows were grazing merrily on dandelion and wild grass, ruminating on their cud and conferring about this and that. Some were lying down, others were upright with calves stringing along never too far. Nathaniel had had to bring them water just this morning. It seemed he was the one taking care of Bruce's animals. The highway which passed through Walkerswood was actually a connecting line of roadway that spanned from Kingston to the north coast. From Monique, the road headed in a northeasterly direction through countryside so green and pastures so grassy as to have justified the fact that this St. Anne was called the Garden Parish. There were not all that many houses in Walkerswood at the time, and what houses there were a good distance between, so that you had ample space to stretch your feet without getting into your neighbor's way, and your children could play and throw stones if they wanted, without fear of breaking anybody's window. The highway really descended after you passed Monique, but Walkerswood was still pretty much hilly country. At least it was covered with knolls and gentle valleys. In the other direction, the road led straight to Fern Gully. But this morning, Nathaniel was looking in the direction of Monique because Hilda was coming today from Kingston. He had waited so long that he was beginning to think Hilda wasn't coming at all, and Nathaniel had decided to turn over the soil in Hortense's vegetable garden, the one that was near the gate. Every so often since morning, Bruce had come to his veranda, which was further off from the road than Nathaniel's, and had shot across the commons. "Hilda reach yet?" "Reach? I don't think Hilda leave Kingston yet. She probably don't even wake yet," Nathaniel shouted back, leaning on his hoe and wiping the sweat from his forehead. "She probably got to party last night and can't wake," Hortense added, speaking to Nathaniel alone. She had come out onto the veranda too, with Juju in her lap. Hilda was older than the two brothers. She was now 36 in fact, but she dressed and acted and had the emotional maturity of a girl of 16. "I have to enjoy myself before I get old," was Hilda's philosophy. "I am not ready for baby yet to tie me down." She bragged of owning her own home in Kingston with all the luxuries of modern life, and while she offered no explanation as to how she, a girl who had left the country with nothing more than a cloth bag, had come to acquire all these commodities, everyone assumed that it had something to do with the many men whom she kept dangling from her little finger. Hilda was pretty and shapely and did not look 36 at all, and she had long mastered the art of using people, particularly men, to get what she wanted. Or it could have been that they used her and had her dangling from their little finger. Sometimes not even Hilda herself was sure about this. It seemed it could go either way. This minute she felt like a queen and the other like a serf, in the precarious vacillations of male and female interactions. She had her moments of crises when she would visit to throw tantrums and take things out on her family, and she seemed not to be able to take out on her subjects. Hilda arrived at 2 o'clock with 4 suitcases. 4. "Is foreign Hilda just land from?" Bruce exclaimed, and Hilda fanned him away, called him an overexcited country bumpkin. 2 of the bags contained her clothes and fancy shoes and skimpy bathing suits and such the like, for she was really en route to meet her boyfriend, never mind which one, in Ochi, where she would sprawl on the beach, and she was going to be spending a week with Nathaniel and Hortense. Could she, by the way? Thanks much. The boyfriend, who had dropped her there and had wheeled off promptly, would be coming back to pick her up. Hilda would sleep in the extra bedroom, which had belonged to the children when they were growing up, Jonas and their stepmother having slept in the room that Nathaniel and Hortense shared now. Another suitcase was full of cute little stuff for her darling little nephew Juju, to liberate him once and for all from the old rags that his mother had him choked up in. The other suitcase contained Kingston people kind of food, which meant tinned corned beef and boxes of frosted flakes and delicate little cupcakes with strawberry icing tucked neatly in the middle, and tinned beans of all types, and sachets of tropical fruit punch that Hilda had bought by the dozen. All this was in the hope of delivering them, at least temporarily, from their boring country people food, which was so substandard and inadequate. And she had stopped and bought pizza from only God knows where. Nathaniel had never heard of pizza. Hilda told Hortense not to bother to cook that night, since they could just eat the pizza. But Nathaniel had already set his mind on some rundown with green bananas, and Hortense had already grated the coconuts. Besides, he didn't like the look of this pizza nonsense. Hilda started at once with her list of complaints, as she always did whenever she came to visit. "Boy, what a piece of heat!" she exclaimed, using her hat to fan herself. "When you people gonna install some fans? Poor Juju must be boiling up." Though a cool breeze was coming down from the highlands, and Juju was sleeping soundly, with not as much as a bead of sweat on him. I wonder if I could get a cool drink of ice water or some nice lemonade. Thanks much, Hilda continued. Nathaniel sent to buy ice from the shop down the road. He could have bought a refrigerator if he wanted, but when he and Hortense had gone to look at the ones in the store in Ocho Rios, they had looked like the boxes that Mas Joe had in the morgue, where he kept dead people, and Nathaniel was turned off by the whole thing and had left the store. Besides, he didn't like anything too cold, and who needed a fridge when they had coconut trees growing round back, loaded with jelly water, and they cured their meat the old-fashioned way by smoking or salting because it just plain tasted better. They only had to send for ice when Hilda came. Then Hilda would trail Hortense into the kitchen whenever she was preparing breakfast or dinner or whatever, and she would launch an attack on the cold stove. I don't know how you manage, Horty, slaving over the coal fire. Why don't you go down to Ochi and take out one of those pretty gas stoves, even if it's on hire purchase? 2 tools and bam, you finish pay for it. I have a 4-burner one in Kingston myself. You just flip on the gas, strike the match, and bam! Fire any time of the day you want. No need to be fanning coal fire and blowing ashes into your face like in caveman days. She would lift the covers of the drums outside and cry out in utter disbelief. You people still bother to catch rainwater? Why? Don't you have running water in the pipes? Hortense would say yes, they did have pipe water, but the drums were for backup. Normally, Nathaniel ignored his sister's vainglorious exclamations and recommendations, but what really peeved him was how she lingered by Jojo's little cot, waiting for the slightest indication from him that he was awake. And she would hoist him from his cot and hug him and smother him and kiss him all over and encourage him to hold on just a while longer and bear the heat. Okay, Jojo? For his auntie would be sending a fan for him as soon as she got to Ochi. Come, let your auntie put on these new clothes on you, Jojo, Hilda said, ripping off the new clothes that she had put on him just before he went to sleep. Nathaniel was afraid Hilda would maul his boy with her long fingernails, which looked more to him like claws, but he always hovered near whenever she was changing Jojo. Don't let Hilda help to knead any dumplings, he cautioned Hortense, well in hearing range of Hilda, who was too busy with her nephew to pay Nathaniel any mind. Why you don't put on the disposable diapers that I bought for him? Hilda asked Hortense with a tone of long-suffering annoyance. You plan to spend your life washing nappies? We're living in modern times, girl child. You want cake soap and bleach to wrinkle up your pretty fingers then? Nathaniel wondered why Hilda didn't go and get a boy of her own. The week dragged on and Cascas was about to break in that house, but as there were only 2 more days left before Hilda's visit ended, they figured they might be able to hold out a little while longer. That day, Hilda wanted to take her nephew to Ochi so she could buy him a fan. Jojo had to come along because she wanted him, at 3 months old, to choose the fan he preferred. And they would stop at the beach for a while, and she and Hortense could catch up on some girl talk. Hortense generally didn't like this kind of girl talk with Hilda. It usually involved Hilda advising Hortense to put on makeup and don't look so drab, or Nathaniel would eventually leave her and get some other woman on the side, a prettier woman who painted her cheeks and nails and put on lipstick and wore some nice heels, and when Nathaniel would find more presentable to introduce to folks. And Hortense should go out to parties and meet people and stop acting so old, cause 28 wasn't all that old, even though she done had the baby already and all that, but still, you get what I'm saying, Horty? And she should not allow Nathaniel to breed her up and turn her into old woman before time. All this while nudging Hortense with her elbow and smiling. Is my brother, but I'm telling you the honest truth. Get up off your back and enjoy life, my dear, Hilda said, pinching Hortense on the arm and winking as if to say, you get my drift, girl child? Hortense didn't get her drift. She was happy with Nathaniel, and she wanted many more children. She didn't feel old, and as far as she was concerned, she didn't look or act old either. Nathaniel told them he could drop them to Ochi, but they had to leave early, and he couldn't come for them until 4 in the evening because he had to supervise the picking and sorting of the pimento berries, for the boys were coming today. They only traveled a short way out of Walker's Wood before they plunged headlong into the narrow winding gorge that was Fern Gully. On either side of the 3-mile road, which curved steeply downhill like an upright turned letter S, there were forest trees and ferns of almost every description, over 500 kinds, it was rumored. They formed such a canopy and shaded the gorge so much that the sun was almost totally blocked out, and there was a dark magical ambience to it, even in middle day. But in spite of its beauty, this was a dangerous gorge, to be descended with care, especially during rainy time. Once you cleared Fern Gully, you were pretty much in Ochi. In those days, it was a yawning, napping town, not the hustling, bustling resort destination it has become. They spent a couple hours at the Turtle Towers beach, and Hilda treated Hortense to lunch at one of the fancy hotels. When you all coming up to Kingston to spend some time with me, if it's even for a week or so? Hilda asked, while Nathaniel was driving back through Fern Gully. Hortense had only been to Kingston once, and she hadn't liked it. She had gone to visit her aunt, who was leaving for America, and that was long ago when Hortense was a teenager. Hortense's parents, who had run off abroad on bogus visas, had both hailed from Kingston, but Hortense had been born in Brownstown, St. Anne. Nathaniel had been to Kingston a good number of times, but he was a countryman at heart, and there never seemed to him that there was enough land anywhere in Kingston even to plant 25 pawpaw trees, and that tree took up the least space of all the fruit trees he knew of. It had been one of Hilda's life goals to get her brother to migrate to Kingston. Sure, they would still keep the land, and as a kind of rainy day insurance, but Kingston was where the action was, and let's face it, Bruce had not been cut out for farming. Bruce, in fact, had been most receptive to Hilda's suggestion, and she was almost sure that he was planning to leave for Kingston soon. Nathaniel was another matter. Hilda's boyfriend was running late, and she was ranting and raving and kept switching her leg from one knee to the other as she sat, and she was threatening to leave the fellow who she had decided was a no-good bum anyway, and she was considering hiring a taxi and going to sprawl out on the beach all by herself and probably meet a nice sugar daddy who knew how to treat a lady. But the fellow did come after all, and Hilda seemed to forget all about the threats, at least for the time being. She left with the same fanfare with which she had arrived, complete with the Queen's wave and kisses blown in the wind. Much moi, moi. She had condescended to accept sprigs of freshly picked thyme and about 2 pounds of Scotch bonnet pepper, which was a whole lot, and pimentos and jellies and yams and green bananas and mangoes and oranges and whatnot, so that the fellow's truck was full and they had to make room on the back seat for the suitcases and some of the bags. Country people love load you up with foodie, man, the fellow commented, peeling an orange with his ratchet knife and squinting as the rind hit his eyes. True, true. It's like they don't realize you can get all this stuff in the big supermarkets in Kingston, explained Hilda apologetically. The boys had come to pick the pimentos, and today they had gathered about 3 crocus bags full. The people in Walkerswood and all across the island referred to the berries as allspice because it was thought the pimento had found a way of capturing the separate, unique flavors of nutmeg, cinnamon, cloves, and pepper, and maybe a few other secret things too, and locking them into one glorious spice. Jamaica was the leading producer of pimento, and St. Anne was pimento country. Nathaniel had constructed a drying area, a kind of platform, which they called a barbecue, for the pimentos. The boys, Zaga and Beefy, had the job of turning the barbecues over so gently with a wooden rake every once in a while so that all the ripe berries would get their due share of sunshine and would dry properly. In about a week, if the sun shone constantly, the berries would be fully dried and would be loaded into bags for sale. Many months went by, and Juju was almost a year old. He had his mother's eyes, his mother's tenderness, and his mother's smile. But he would be tall and hard-boiled like his father. When Hortense tried to use pillows to brace Juju up, as many people did to train the baby to sit up, Nathaniel had scoffed at the idea. He wanted no pillows holding up his son. Juju had a backbone of his own. When Hortense reached her hand out to try and guide him as he was trying out his first steps and testing his little legs, Nathaniel told her to let the boy walk on his own. Let him stumble, let him fall, let him get bruised and get up again, like a farmer's son. Whoever God was, and wherever God was, he had given Juju a sturdy frame, capable of handling the hard knocks of country life, and Nathaniel felt that if they shielded Juju too much, his legs wouldn't grow strong, his muscles would atrophy, and Juju would not have what it took to be a farmer in Walkerswood. Being a farmer meant pushing a wheelbarrow uphill, loaded with compost or raw cow dung, and rolling it back downhill toward gravity, which tugged at you mercilessly because the hill was steep and the wheelbarrow was heavy. Being a farmer meant plowing the ground at least 2 feet deep and several feet wide and long, depending on what you had in mind, to get a good turnover of the soil to let in the air. Being a farmer meant scaling coconut trees, which could grow past 20 feet if you had the native variety, and coconut trees had no branches, so you had to be skillful and strong. Being a farmer meant balancing 20 pounds of yellow yams on your head and a hand of bananas in one hand and maybe something else in the other hand, most times going uphill. And you would have to know what you were doing because something as simple as a mosquito bite could throw you off balance if you didn't keep your head. So being a farmer was a serious thing, a heavy responsibility, and not everyone was up to it. Many times, Nathaniel would take Juju with him into the field and show him things and tell him this and that, little tidbits of information that would prove useful in years to come. It would give Juju a head start over the other fellows at the agricultural college when time came, and Juju was catching on too. He used sticks to dig holes and put seeds into them, as he had seen Nathaniel do, though the little boy could barely walk yet and could not say very many words, though Hortense swore he could. Juju, seated beside Nathaniel on the ground, would do his bit to pick up weeds, as his father was doing, though sometimes the infant would also pluck up scallions and garlic tops and carrots, because he did not know the difference, bless his little heart. Sometimes an ant would crawl up his little nappy and he would scamper to Nathaniel saying, "At, at," which meant ants, ants, ants. And Nathaniel would explain that farmers were not bothered by ant bites, but he scratched it for him just the same, seeing as he was so little and was making such progress. Nathaniel also encouraged Hortense to take Juju with her to the market sometimes, though she couldn't stay as long when she had him with her. Nathaniel wanted the boy to be well-rounded in all aspects of farm life, from the dirt to the table, as they say, and the sooner he got the exposure, the better. Juju was a bit of a bother to his mother at the market, but she did often smile when she saw him helping her fill the wicker baskets with dried banana leaves to cushion the fruits, or when he just all of a sudden grabbed a ripe banana from one of the other shoppers' bags and peeled it by himself and started eating it. But when she had to take him with her, she couldn't get to go to the big bountiful farmers market in Brownstown, which she much preferred to the market in Ocho Rios, as she was used to doing from time to time. At home, Juju had no playmates for most of the day. Bruce's two girls were much older than Juju. Annie was 9 and Nerissa was 7, and they were away at school until afternoon. In any case, Juju was too small and couldn't run about with them. The girls would pet him and cuddle him for a while, and even gave him jockey-back rides when they were ready, but they soon got bored and ran off down the pasture to play stuck and pull or dandy shandy, or clap hand games with the other big children. Most times, Juju stayed with Nathaniel, and his father was all too happy. The only thing was that when he was handling heavy machinery or using the cutlass or the hoe, he had to tie Juju to a tree like a little billy goat with a string around his spongy belly. But it was for the boy's own good. Alright, so that's the end of chapter 2. End of chapter 2 of The Fighter in the Family. Alright, so I'm going to wrap it up there, and I'm going to ask you to join me in other videos as I continue to read The Fighter in the Family. You know, this book is very special to me, and as I said, you know, the character Nathaniel is based off my grandfather, whose name was also Nathaniel. The story is not a true story, but much of it, you know, that's how my grandfather behaved, and that's, you know, some of it is true. Alright, so thank you for joining me, and take care.